to our episode on sexual harassment and gender-based violence. Today is part 3, and we'll be covering the psychological aspects regarding sexual harassment and gender-based violence. With me is Gigi, Olwagen-Meyer, and Simangele, Mphahlele. Welcome back, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Simangele, we're turning to you mainly in this section. What are some of the consequences surrounding gender-based violence and sexual harassment, especially because it causes such significant physical, emotional, psychological, as well as economic harm to the survivor?
Yeah, sexual harassment can wreak a lot of havoc to a person, and it can really affect them throughout their career. It can affect them throughout their lives. And there's not a lot of emphasis on it because I think people don't realize how much damage this can do to a person. In general, psychologists do say that they've seen cases of sexual harassment, and people or victims will demonstrate depression, they'll demonstrate anxiety, they'll demonstrate post-traumatic stress. And also physically, it has a lot of effects as well. Imagine having to go to work and having to see that same person again and having to pass by their desk. Really, it can cause a lot of stress for an individual. Having to drive to work and know that you're going to see that same person again can do a lot of damage. And as you said, there's economic damage. We've seen women lose jobs because they can't cope after a sexual harassment event. Their self-worth, their self-esteem, how they see themselves starts diminishing because there's a lot of blame and fault that we place on ourselves, or a victim would place on themselves.
And you know, that's so true. And I think what we need to look at is, for instance, in my space, women can come to me and say, Anthea, I've been sexually harassed, or I've been beaten up by my partner. How do I deal with it? What advice or what support can I give them? Because I'm not trained in this area. My expertise is law, so I might be able to tell them the legal space, but that might not be what they want at the time. So how do I deal with that when they come to me and ask me for help, or they just want to speak to me about it?
I think sharing is the most basic form of relief, and it's the most basic form of therapy. So when someone comes to us, I think it's important to acknowledge them, to listen, and to avoid judging and giving advice. And as you listen, I think it's important then, with the listening, to just support them through their thinking and just ask questions. What do you think is next? Have they considered options? But not really tell them what to do, because that in itself can hold a lot of pressure. But as a person is sharing, what it does for them is that they start going through the whole incident, and they start seeing how the incident happened, and they start realizing what are the things potentially that they might need to do to be able to get out of the situation, or follow a next step that can help them follow through on an action that might help them in getting out of the situation.
Gigi, any thoughts on your side?
Well, from the perspective where we, in the legal profession, where we're not necessarily having a HR department or a specific person that we can talk to, I think it's important that we start getting the narrative going, especially amongst female colleagues, to say that it is a reality and it can happen to any one of us, and that we are there to support each other and make ourselves available, whether it's for a senior or junior or a peer, that they feel they can approach you and come and talk to you about this, and then be there and listen and provide the support best way you can.
Can we refer them to other organizations or other more qualified people to deal with it?
I think that's the first step, to also support them, help them find the options if there are any, and refer them to professionals, especially from a psychosocial perspective, because the damage can linger on, and if people don't deal with the situation, it can really affect them psychologically and how they show up on a day-to-day basis. So referring them is one of the best steps, so they get the appropriate help.
Now, can you give us some tips, Simangele, on what steps we can take as the survivor to start our healing process?
As much as you will see a therapist or you will see a qualified counselor or a qualified coach that deals with trauma, it's also important as a person to look at things that can help you and self-help tools that you can use by yourself on an ongoing basis. Because when you do leave those people, you still need to find ways of supporting yourself. And one of the basic things is writing. Journaling, I think, is one of the most archaic ways of expressing ourselves, and I could not stress more how valuable that exercise can be, because as you're writing down, you're actually taking out all the emotions out of yourself and taking it out somewhere else, and you actually see the emotions and what they are, because when we don't acknowledge those emotions, they tend to build up in our minds, in our bodies, and that can cause ultimately health issues as well if we don't deal with it. So writing down about what has happened, being expressive about it, can really help you deal with it from a mind perspective and take it all out and put it somewhere and be able to actually arrange your thoughts in that process as well. The other thing as well is reflecting on the experience. We tend to avoid traumatic experience and not reflect on them, but that only does us harm. By looking at the actual experience, what happened, playing it out really helps us to be able to face the situation, face what has happened to us, and acknowledge that something has happened. By not acknowledging it again, by putting it away in a little corner, can cause us harm. And along the way, you find people being triggered, and it's actually stuff that has happened to us, and we've put it somewhere in a black box, and we never do anything about it. So identifying the experience is quite helpful, and reflecting on it is also helpful as well. And should you take the next steps, it also helps you to build up the strength to face any consequences, therefore, that might come afterwards. The other thing to do as well is, as you're going through all of these things, and probably maybe some people might take the route of going through a case, as Gigi said, or reporting a situation, or they might be going through the route of therapy, it's important to do a self-care inventory. Remind yourself of the things that you enjoy, the things that make you happy. Be around people that help you feel grounded, and make sure that on a day-to-day basis you start putting in these activities that help you to be able to build yourself again. Because the reality is, any incident that's traumatic really does break down ourselves, our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves. So it's important to build that up again and get to a point where you can overcome what has happened to you. And then lastly, again, go and speak to professionals, go and seek professional help. There are many organizations that are out there that deal with women who have gone through sexual harassment, that help women who've gone through some level of gender violence, and also accept the fact that it's a journey. You're not going to get over it overnight. You have to take certain steps to get you to a point where you heal.
Thank you. Gigi, your thoughts?
Once again, from the legal profession perspective, the moment that you're dealing with a client who's been a victim of harassment, it is important to make sure that you let the client understand that their voice is being heard and that their story is being heard, and that it was not their fault, and that they are not to blame, and that the court will provide them with the necessary assistance and remedies as well.
I think it's so correct, because we don't often know what we can do as people that are listening, especially when they coming forward, and also if you are a survivor, what steps you can do. And I think your self-help tips is very valuable, and I think we will be placing that on a slide as well and putting it up in the last week of February, so that you are able to download them and keep them, to know that these are the steps I need to take to help me, and also for others, and in what questions they should be posing, and how they can help someone go through this traumatic space. So thank you once again, ladies. This concludes part 3 of our episode on sexual harassment and gender-based violence. We will be doing at a later stage a follow-up session where we'll be speaking to organizations that specifically deal with sexual harassment and gender-based violence, and what processes and procedures they do to help heal those survivors. Thank you.